So, welcome at yet another episode of the IoT Burstcast. Very nice that we have Stacey from Stacey on IoT with us. Welcome, and can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Stacey Higginbotham, and I do the Internet of Things podcast, and I have for, like 8 years now. And I also have a newsletter that goes out every Friday that's Stacey on IoT. And really, all I do is talk to people about the Internet of Things.
That's super cool. So you've been talking to people about the Internet of Things for many years. So, probably a hard question because there's not a single definition. But looking at this IoT hype or this IoT thing, what is it for you?
So I always talk about the IoT as the combination of three: cheap computing, thanks to things like Google. Cheap computing means cheap analytics. The lowered cost of sensors, so the cost of sensors dropping, and then ubiquitous and we're getting to relatively inexpensive wireless connectivity. So when you combine all of those things, you have this that allows you to get data places than ever before. And then layer on top of that artificial intelligence, or even just basic machine learning and algorithms. And you have this ability to take that information and draw new conclusions, automate things. To me, it's as game changing as broadband was and as mobile broadband was for the just not just technology, but just the world in general.
All right. That's one of the best explanations of IoT I've heard in years actually. But so like this big vision, like this big movement. So what's the current state, do you think, when you talk to all these different people? And I think also a bit cutting through uh, the hype. So where are we? What's the state that you feel?
I feel like super demoralized right now. Honest, and maybe it's because I'm in the US and, there's COVID-19, there's the presidential election, there's wildfires. But I really had hoped that we would take all of this information and we would start to use it to make, like I always say, IoT makes the invisible visible. And I thought we would use it to make things more efficient. Or maybe if you track air pollution around factories, a city could actually say, hey, we don't want to give you tax breaks anymore because you're actually polluting our cities and we can show you the data. And I thought that's kind of where we were going to go. I know that's incredibly naive of me, but I thought we were going to use the information and abilities we had to make things better. What's happened is there are definitely efficiencies that are happening, and that's good. But we've really basically branded a lot of things IoT, thrown a bunch of junk at the wall, and then left people to try to figure out what to do with it. And a lot of times they're optimizing for cost, which is totally understandable. But when you optimize for cost and you have all of this information, you're really hurting a lot of people, and not just people, but you're also drawing down your ability to be resilient. And that's something we're seeing with COVID right now is we've basically optimized ourselves into a corner with some of this technology. And so I guess I'm a little dismayed.
Well, no, I think you're not alone, and typically, see, so we started the Things Network and the Things Industries with the mantra, let's build this thing together. Uh, and also, when you build something together, you all benefit. And I think I can totally relate that the siloed approach you see now happening more and more in the industry results in like completely, let's say, a ceiling of the upside of the IoT opportunity. So more open source, more open APIs, etc. Yeah, we feel that. I mean, we can relate to that, and so how are we gonna how are you and I how are we gonna break that ceiling of silos of what you just said? Like what's gonna like save us from this complete disillusion?
I think we got into this mess because because of the silos and because IoT is really freaking hard, right? Just putting down that physical infrastructure that you need to like start benefiting is hard technologies we need. So I think we really need to focus on making that part easy and having well established and well linked ways to get a device connected to the internet and manage it and do that in open ways. Because I mean, I can go to AWS today, Amazon, and I can buy a board that has connectivity, but I'm totally locked into this system, right? And if I change it, I don't know how many, like if I do 10,000 sensors, I've got to like change all of that. So I think we need to have more open standards. I know that more open standards, we need to have more cooperation between the parties, and then we can actually start to build real things. Because right now, people aren't trying to create the ceiling because they want to limit themselves. They're creating the ceiling because, you know, if you are a restaurant owner and you want to start deploying connectivity in your restaurant or deploying sensors in your restaurant, you don't want to have to actually get a double E degree just to make sure it happens correctly, right? So we need to make that easy. And then once we do that, we need to start creating use cases that are bigger than the company. And by that, I mean, you need to look at what you want to do directly, but then you also want to look at how that's going to fit into your organization as a whole, and then even the world. And again, this is maybe me being naive, but I really think there are like 7.5 billion people on this planet. And if we start thinking a little bit bigger, we have the tools to make things better. That's it.
No, yeah. So yeah, totally can relate to that. And so moving forward, I think what we see is that the silos are also created because the investors behind the IoT companies, they need to see a walled garden. They need to not only see that some company can create value, but they also can grasp value. And this creates these silos, right? It's the walled garden that your investor wants, which is makes perfectly sense. And
it doesn't. This is so I'm really excited about this because this played out in broadband, and I really think it's important. It played out in semiconductors. Way back when Intel was building chips, they had an economic incentive to make their chips, like you needed to run those fabs because they're super expensive, like 24/7, right? And you wanted to introduce the new ones so people would upgrade their machines. So they actually built this entire ecosystem. They funded all these companies that would use more computing, right? So the goal there was to build computing everywhere because it would benefit them. In the broadband world, we saw kind of the opposite approach. The telcos were like, oh, we have this good thing going. We have control of this pipe. And so what they did is they said, we're going to charge you based on the data, as opposed to having it's an abundance model. They had a scarcity model. And that really stymied their walled gardens, stymied the mobile industry for a long time, like decades. You remember how you had to on your mobile phone, if you wanted an app, you had to go to the carrier app store. And if you were a developer, you had to develop for 18 of them. It was so awful. So I think that we can have walled gardens, but we have to set the walled gardens maybe higher up in the application layer. Maybe it's not in the application, but you have to create an abundance at the bottom where everyone can come in and innovate and do things. And that doesn't mean you don't necessarily make money. And that's what's hard for, I think in the advertising model, people like walled gardens because they want to kind of suck you in and keep you there. But that doesn't have to be that way for IoT. And I'm so sorry I interrupted you, but go on.
No, but this is exactly the point that what you're saying is that you have created abundance from the bottom, and actually what you're saying is history is repeating itself. Is that in the end, the open abundant model through competition wins. The question is how can we get there with IoT? And the Things Network and the Things Industries has been based on the premise that we thought, okay, that connectivity is going to be let's say abundant state. So we always put in that connectivity as something that's free. and for everybody to use. The question is what you now see when these connectivity networks come. Um, um, so how does that value flow back in a way that the infrastructure is still funded? And if you look, for instance, what happens in open source, like Linux itself, the core is free and it's open. And the Linux Foundation, I mean, probably they have a large budget, but the billion and multi-billion-dollar industry, which is a commercial shell around Linux, that is what makes Linux strong. So you need both ways, and I think that when we see, I hope that there are more and more companies that do that, and I'm very optimistic about, for instance, a company like Microsoft that bought GitHub, that is now under their new leadership embracing more open source, embracing more developer community. So yeah, there are some positive signs, but that way of thinking needs to come to IoT probably a bit closer. But yeah, probably it's not going to come from the operators, but yeah, we need to find another way, and that's what we're trying. So in regards to go to market, what do you think is limiting adoption, or what do you think are still hurdles when we move like our conversation from technology push to, let's say, business solution pull? What kind of challenges do you see there?
I think the biggest challenge is that it's hard. So like if I am a company and I want to do, let's say I'm a manufacturing plant and I want to do predictive maintenance. Maybe I'm like, ooh, I'm going to automate my whole factory, but that is crazy times, right? That is super hard, the project. So let's say you start small and you're like, oh, I'm going to do predictive maintenance on anything that vibrates, or maybe you're probably more likely to pick up either a single type of machine or a production line. So you start that and you implement it. And then what happens is a lot of the time you don't see a huge ROI, or you realize you've done this and it doesn't scale, or you can't see a way to make it scale. A lot of the solutions that are the most innovative, that are actually trying to be as open at the bottom as possible, they're not quite there yet. I think we're a little early. I think we need better management. So we need, if you think that we are creating a kind of a virtualized vision of a factory or a house or an office building, what you need is kind of a configuration management, like a chef or a puppet for all of the devices and sensors that's really easy to use and move things around. For that, you're going to need all of those things to talk to something, right? If they can't talk to each other, they have to talk to some layer. So I think we need something like that.
An IoT butler.
Yeah, well, okay, sure.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm
don't
American.
got it.
We don't have butlers.
Yeah, no, we neither. No, but just as a metaphor, like, but yeah, something that helps you easily integrate that, yeah. But I think adding to that, I think also you need that, but you don't want that from a platform that locks you in. And I think there are platforms that trying to fit into this proposition, but it also limits you in your capabilities. So for sure. And what do you feel about? I mean, and there's a clear difference with, I think, a US approach and a European approach. But what do you think about how data flows, and like, who do you trust with what, and what's your vision on that?
Yeah. So I'm going for, I was also going to talk about power, but we won't. We'll just say we need better low power sensors, so you don't have to touch them all the time, because that's just a pain. Okay.
Sure.
So we're going into data flows. One of the really interesting things, I think, is when we're establishing the or when we're doing things with the IoT, we have to stop thinking about it in terms of transactions. Like, I buy this from you. What you're establishing is these ongoing relationships with your service providers, right? So there's the flow of information, there's the flow of data. That also means that you have to really trust them. You have to say, hey, this data is really important to me. If you share this with people, people will know like how many cars I'm manufacturing a day, which is really competitive information. So to do that, one, I think everybody in the industry needs to start, in business in general, needs to start thinking about building relationships as opposed to transactions, because I think that's going to go away when we're talking about creating value on a near constant basis between different players, right? You're also going to have to think about building these relationships across ecosystems. It's not a one-to-one. Like, as the factory owner, I want the people who make my, steam traps to talk to the people who make my boilers. Uh, so, and I want them to share information about my stuff, but I don't necessarily want them to share that with my competitors that they might be working with. And one of the things that will help make this possible is changing the way we do contracts and explicitly calling out the data that we think we're going to use and how we're going to use it to the extent that's possible. I do think that the flip side of that is that we have to carve out little areas for things like machine learning, because you don't want to like lock all your data away and not be able to use it if you have this cool idea. So that's kind of there's this tension in like, maybe I'll need this data with, because the longer you keep your data, the riskier it is, right? That it might get hacked or shared or that sort of thing. So I think there's two things here. One, thinking about trust with your partners and within the ecosystem. Two is building secure and even shareable contracts around data, because that's it. Like, once you get the lawyers involved, like all your scalability goes out the window, right? So maybe establish industry guidelines around some licensing contracts. Microsoft was doing something like that. I thought it was really cool. Okay, that was long.
Yeah, no, I mean, just summarizing what you're saying is that when you introduce IoT within a company, you have to have a very, very clear plan and clear data governance on what's going to happen with that data, and and that is that's perfectly clear, and I think that's missing. I think when people come in with an IoT product with here's your login, here's your password. Oh, by the way, it's stored on our servers. And we didn't really think about what we're going to do with it or what kind of guarantees we give you. And super interesting. I mean, you've shared so much already in 15 minutes. You brought us from a bit of a disappointment you have in the industry. There's no further collaboration to enhance network effects because you have all these silos and walled gardens of, let's say, suboptimal value grasping entities. And then you brought us to make IoT more easier, also for distribution, but also for installation, and that we need to be very, very transparent about the data. So do you want to, anything you want to end this with? Do you have a shout out or?
I guess, I just want people to think bigger and don't treat these things as one night stands. Treat them as a relationship and behave accordingly.
Okay. Now let's end with that. And I want to thank you very much for sharing so much knowledge within a very short period of time. And we're probably going to see you again at the virtual conference we're giving in January. So we still have to talk about that, but probably we'll figure out something. And then I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I had fun.
Great.